Okay. Um, Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the session, Jack and the Tech Giant, Freedom of Expression in Tech Era session at the 2020 Asia Pacific Regional Internet Governance Forum. This session is about big tech and freedom of expression in Southeast Asia. And by saying big techs, we mean tech giants, companies like Facebook, Twitter, and Google. However, this session particularly focuses on Facebook due to the impact of the platform in the country in this region. But there will be other app mentioned as well. According to the Internet World Stat, there are about 3 million Facebook users in 10 nations in ASEAN, which account to about 60% of the population. So that's why it's really important to talk about it here. And we've seen the impact of Facebook in the country in Southeast Asia, and it has been well documented in the media. Actually, we've heard about the Rohingya genocide in Myanmar as a result of online disinformation on Facebook, and it has gone into offline violence. We have heard about the troll in the Philippines, in which Facebook has been used as a platform to spread disinformation as a filter bubble as a result of Facebook algorithm. Um, these are some examples that have been in the media, and this is why we decided to host this session to talk about this situation. I'm Ploy, by the way. I'm a founder of a human rights organization called DigitalReach, with a look at impact of technology on human rights in Southeast Asia. Our work includes freedom of expression and information, digital privacy, and digital security. And I'm here with four experts today who will share with us about the situation in the country they're working on. I would like to introduce you to Liza Garcia, the Executive Director of Foundation for Media Alternative from the Philippines. Kirsten Han from Singapore. She's a former editor-in-chief of New Narrative, now a freelance journalist and the curator of We the Citizen, which is a weekly newsletter about Singaporean politics, social justice, and civil society. Kirsten, just feel free to post a link here in the chat box. Yadanar from Free Expression Myanmar, and Mathieu Pallerin from LICADHO, who has been with LICADHO for 16 years and can share with us about the situation in Cambodia. So let me guide you to the session structure a bit before we start the discussion. So this session will be in the chatting style. So we will talk about the impact of Facebook and policy, other tech platform as well, and what should be done in terms of regional stakeholders. This part will go on for about 40 minutes, 3 rounds of questions, and then we can have the Q&A, and I'll close the sessions afterward for Q&A. For Q&A, the APrIGF Secretariat will guide you on what to do if you want to ask questions. So we will start our discussion session now. This question goes to Liza. So Liza, we know about the impact of Facebook in the Philippines on freedom of expression and information. This includes the rise of troll in the country, which fuel the spread of disinformation, which can manipulate people. We have seen the effects it draw on the harassment of those who are government critics as well. One thing is that independent media is at great risk in the country from being shut down or harassment, which can also increase impact of troll. In this case, what has been done by Facebook so far, and what is your view on how Facebook can increase more effort, and also maybe other tech platform as well in terms of supporting freedom of expression and information in the Philippines?
Okay, thanks so much, Ploy. So, first of all, I would say that it's not just in the Philippines. It's not just independent media that is at risk. Um, Perhaps some of you or most of you must have heard of the many cases filed against social media news site Rappler in the Philippines, its directors and staff, and Maria Ressa, who is our speaker, of course, for the closing session of the APrIGF. So a guilty verdict on cyber libel was handed down for Maria and one of the former researcher writer of Rappler by the court this in April this year during the height of the pandemic. And then a month after that, in May, the country's largest television station, ABS-CBN, was forced to shut down after Congress did not renew its congressional franchise. And alternative media sites as well are being targeted with distributed denial of service attacks. And journalists are being red tagged, they're being called communists, etc. So freedom of press freedom in the country, in the Philippines, is really under attack. journalists are being discredited, and the trolls online are hijacking the narrative of what is freedom, what is democracy, etc. And it is often in the social media platforms where trolls, haters of those who say something critical about the government thrive. But in fairness, of course, to Facebook, they have taken down several pages or sites that are known to be spreading false content, citing, of course, coordinated inauthentic behavior. So last year, there were two big takedowns in January and March. And just recently, a few days ago, Facebook actually took down several pages originating from China and the Philippines. Again, for CID, saying that these fake accounts are part of operations to mislead people. Yeah, and some of the pages that were taken down were purportedly being managed by military officers who are trying to discredit civil society in the country. And even last night, I was listening to the speech of President Duterte. He actually hit Facebook, saying that for their policy, he says that they're blocking government efforts. And there was some sort of threat on Facebook. Okay, again, in fairness to Facebook, they, aside from the takedowns, they've also initiated media literacy training in the country. So we have this, they have this program called DigitalReach in the Philippines. And I'm sure you must have heard also of that Facebook also hired a human rights director, and they have conducted human rights impact assessment. But what I do hope is that they also implement the recommendations of the assessments that they conducted in different countries. In Cambodia, they did one. Sri Lanka, I can't remember the other countries. But yeah, I think that we shouldn't just be talking about Facebook here. It's not the only social media platform that we should be concerned with. In the case of the Philippines, for instance, we just commemorated the 48th anniversary of the declaration of martial law in the Philippines. Not because we're celebrating it, but because we do not want a repeat of history. We do not want a repeat of the abuses and the atrocities that happened during that time. We have to learn from our history. However, it is disconcerting to see how people are actually being influenced by what they read, what they see, and watch on different social media platforms. And again, not just on Facebook, where you see all this toxicity, no? That sometimes you just want to get out of it. There's also Google, and especially YouTube, if I may say that, because a lot of individuals and groups, especially in the Philippines, are trying to revise history, and they are making videos, posting videos that are misleading in content. And this, the harmful facts, this is harmful because the facts there are being altered. Now, what should companies do? Companies should recognize that this big tech company should recognize their power. They have this immense power because they're big, and they there's a lot of clout they have. They are able to influence people. So what I'm saying is that they should prioritize public interest and the rights of people over profit. People do complain. They should listen to the community. Not all that is viral, that is popular on these social media platforms is good.
Thank you, Lisa. That's a great insight. Talking about disinformation, I would like to ask Kirsten this question. In Singapore, we know about the use of Protection from Online Falsehood and Manipulation Act. Here, I will refer to it as POFMA, and there have been occasions where Facebook allowed POFMA to have influences over the content available for audiences in Singapore. What is your view regarding Facebook's decision on the situation?
So under the POFMA law, if Facebook gets an order from the government, it has to comply. Otherwise, it could be fined like up to $1 million. And so it basically comes down to, how much of a fight is Facebook willing to put up for free expression in Singapore. And so, in the run up to the passage of the law, Facebook had issued statements and been part of the Asia Internet Coalition, issuing strong statements against POFMA, saying that it would be very harmful to freedom of expression. But ultimately, after the law has passed, when the order comes from the government, Facebook does comply. They do issue like a statement saying that they're not happy about complying, but they do comply. And I think that's because, their headquarters are in, their Asia office headquarters are in Singapore. They have a big presence here. And they use this office as Singapore as their gateway to the rest of Southeast Asia, right? So there's a lot of business and high stakes on Facebook's presence in Singapore, and ultimately, taking on the Singapore government by refusing to comply with POFMA and essentially breaking Singapore law is not an act of civil disobedience that a big tech company is going to partake on behalf of Singaporeans, right? It's just not their fight. And so they have been complying with these POFMA orders that they've been receiving.
Thank you, Kirsten. Next, let's look at the situation in Myanmar here. We're here with Yin. We know about the troll situation in Myanmar and the spread of online disinformation that have gone into offline violence, and the effect of it is particularly on the ethnic group like the Rohingya. We know that the election is going to happen soon in about 2 months' time. What do you think can be the effect of troll in this situation? Is there any area that you think that Facebook should pay extra attention on?
Yeah, taking point. Yeah, like in other countries' elections, there might be negative implications caused by the disinformation or conspiracy theory about the Myanmar election on Facebook platform. But I will not here define those effects since the work of our organization does not focus on that area. But I would like to highlight the violation or the potential by Facebook's new policy for upcoming Myanmar election, such as like removing misinformation that could lead to voter suppression or damage the integrity of the electoral process, and paid for by, discovered by Facebook in the Facebook ads policy. It is good that Facebook is taking care of the election, and especially the plan of out of context image. If they are about to share the photos and that are over 1 year old and could violate a Facebook policy, for example, rather than restriction the users not to share. However, we have not known yet on what basis Facebook defines the certain content is misinformation or rumors. It cannot just rely on the documented information to fact check, because some user content might say the truth, which are not formally or officially documented because of the chronic censorship scheme by the Myanmar military and Myanmar government. But Facebook might define them as misinformation, unfortunately. And also, besides like some posts or comments which campaign not to vote, for example, might affect the election, but it is still legitimate in democracy as a strong political statement. I'm worried if the removal of misinformation is rather subjected and will copy the Facebook old problem of over and under moderation. And when it's come to the Facebook and new ads policy on the Myanmar election, on the one hand, it is good for public interest to know what political parties are using ads, who pays for the political party, and how much they invest in certain posts, etc. But on the other hand, it's a blanket policy which also implies on the human rights group like us imposes risks from the government surveillance to the legal threat by the government for the person who pay for the ads. In Myanmar, there are many undemocratic criminal laws, for example, like currently 6 criminal defamation laws, sedition ads, etc., to punish the human rights defender for his or her hate speech, which makes the government very uncomfortable. So during the election, it is very critical for us, individual human rights defenders and right groups to point out the failure and errors of candidates and political parties. But when a human rights activist has to publicize his or her name on Facebook ads, which will be stored for 7 years in their Facebook researchable at library, it is like Facebook is facilitating the government in punishing the rights group, I would say. And it is okay for us to provide our name and our ID to Facebook as a requirement between the company and its client. But we are very concerned about our freedom and security after free speech when our names and IDs are shown to the public on Facebook like that.
Thank you so much, Jin. This is really great to know based on the local perspective. Yeah, election is foundation of democracy and it's important to be free and fair. Let's talk about Cambodia next. Mathieu, we have seen the effect of disinformation on Facebook platform that has resulted in some government critics and activists having to flee the country because they are concerned of their own safety. In terms of disinformation, can you share with us about what really happened and how should Facebook deal with this given the context of Cambodia?
Yes. Thank you. So in Cambodia, there has been historically abuse of social media, mainly Facebook, in spreading fake content. Mostly with the aim of insulting or soiling the reputation of critics. Most recently, however, there has been a trend where fake news is spread on fake social media accounts, and that content is then taken over by authorities to prosecute and go after individuals in the real world. So in recent years, we had the case of the opposition leader who was prosecuted in part on the basis of content package delivered on social media in obscure, unknown Facebook account, and then taken over by ruling party-aligned newspapers to say, aha, there's this big case against individual XYZ. Most recently, you might have read in the New York Times an expose of the latest critic who had to flee the country, Venerable Lonsawat. He is a Buddhist monk. And earlier this year, a campaign was waged against him using fake content distributed on Facebook, where it was a series of videos where somebody was impersonating the monk and pretending that he was entertaining a love affair with a young Cambodian. The content was fake, yet within 48 hours, the local authorities seized of the content and said that they would investigate the monk, and ultimately within a week or two, the monk was defrocked by the Buddhist clergy in what was clearly, evidently fake content. Subsequently, human rights groups like LICADHO have investigated and came to the conclusion that it was fake. But yeah, it is a worrying trend to see this fake content, let's say, reaching into the real world. It's not only confined on social media, but then the fake content on social media is then used to go after people in the real world, either through courts or, in this case, among the Buddhist clergy. I will also say more recently, we had a case where activists, critics of the government were arrested, and as they were detained, their digital device were seized, and the Facebook page they were administrating was taken over by the authorities. And it's a worrying precedent that we had not seen before, in part because we are worried right now what they have done with access to the administration right was to remove content, but they could possibly also inject fake content and pretending that they are the administrator of the pages, when in fact they have merely seized the digital device and are pretending to be these people. So that's something to keep an eye on.
Thank you, Mathieu. It's really interesting to learn from you here. We move into the next round of question. We look at Facebook policy here. Coming out of Silicon Valley, policy of Facebook apply universally, but often we have questions whether it really can't fit for all. So, to Liza, the CEO of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, announced that Facebook support freedom of expression, which led to the company deciding not to fact check any political speech. Well, it actually targeting the upcoming US election. I know that the Philippines has been described as patient zero in relation to disinformation in the 2016 Philippine election before. And it can really, this announcement can really be problematic if applying universally. If Facebook has to learn one thing from the Philippine election to make the election free and fair, what would that be?
Okay, difficult question. Maybe that question should be for Facebook to respond to. What are they going to do actually, so that they can ensure that elections in the different countries would be free and fair, because a lot of people will be definitely using their platform. Or I don't know, or maybe the question should be, what if there is one thing that Filipino electorates have learned from the experience of using Facebook in the last two elections that we've had, then what would that be? So I was thinking, so anyway, again, I would like to reiterate, when we talk about big platforms, they hold so much economic and political clout. For a lot of people, for instance, these social media platforms are the source of news. That's whatever is posted in these platforms. They hold considerable influence on other people. If we talk about elections, on the voters. If you look at Filipinos on the average, no, according, if we go by the statistics, the figures that were given by Hootsuite, they are very much online. They spend 9 hours 45 minutes on an average daily on the internet, and maybe that's 3 hours 50, or almost 4 hours on social media. Now, if this is the amount of time that is being spent by people online, by Filipinos online, then we should really be concerned about the quality of the materials, the content that people are viewing online. So I think for countries that would be having their elections, well, as early as now, maybe what the platforms can do is actually to look at the posts, review the posts that are there, remove content that promote fake information, because this may influence in the end votes and election results. People are already starting to believe the claims which are not even backed up by accurate data and research. Of course, the Philippines will be having its elections in May 2022. And as early as these days, actually, politicians are already gearing up. They're preparing. So they're everywhere, especially in social media. Some are even buying fan pages. So they already have this big fan base or constituency to start with. So that's a trend that's happening. And definitely when we talk about COVID-19, for instance, it is really online where we will see a lot of action, the strategy, political strategies, campaigning that will happen. So there will be big money here. There's a big chunk of, a lot of money will be spent in social media, because that is where the campaigns will happen. So we will see here how social media will be more entrenched in the conduct of the elections. That's why we should actually watch out for more disinformation in the coming days, because for sure social media again will be used to discredit people and what they stand for. So maybe this is something to watch out for, because it's really big business for digital campaigners and influencers. But of course, if we talk about the electorates, then again, voters' education is necessary, in as much as we always say we need media and digital literacy. So for voters, get your facts right, get them from credible and reliable sources. We should fact check and be vigilant I suppose.
Thank you so much, Liza. Let's see what will happen as a result of Facebook decision. Next, we know about that is quite challenging in country in Southeast Asia, our region, due to the repressive political environment. I want to ask Kirsten these questions. POFMA has been criticized as a repressive law because we know that it shouldn't be a responsibility of the government to decide what is fake news and what is not, particularly in the situation where the government has been criticized for suppressing FOEI in the country. However, I know that Facebook has a policy to follow the law in the country. In this case, when that's a repressive law, what can be a recommendation for Facebook on this?
I think it is difficult because, it does put Facebook in this very sort of kind of dicey situation if they were to say that, oh, we will not respect laws that we think are repressive, because then again, it's like, would we also be okay with a giant tech company saying we will choose what law in the countries we're in to observe and to abide by? So, like, for example, in the case of POFMA, we might say, yeah, Facebook should resist, but it's also very uncomfortable to say that a giant tech company should be able to pick and choose what laws it abides by in the countries that it operates. I think one of the big problems, and like adding on to what Lisa was saying before, is that as a tech giant, so not just Facebook, but also, Google and Twitter, they have huge amounts of power over, our political opinions, over the things that we know, over our interactions with the world. Yet, having such power, we do not get the same sort of transparency and accountability that comes along with it. Like, a lot of us just don't know how things work sometimes. So when Facebook says, oh, we are removing this page because it violates our community standards, it's not even clear to everybody what exactly it's violated, why, and how Facebook makes a decision of whether something should be delisted or something should be banned. And so that affects things, So I think while we understand that Facebook will have problems being forced to abide by laws that authoritarian governments pass, what we also need is to be able to better understand what Facebook is, how it operates, and why, and the reasons behind the decisions that it makes. So during the election, Singapore's election that happened in July, for example, Facebook actually removed pages, and it was interesting that for all the government talks about POFMA and the need to address fake news, when it came to Facebook looking at inauthentic user behavior and removing pages during the elections, the pages that they removed were pro-ruling party pages. And then they said, we remove them because of, it violates our practice and our community standards and their inauthentic behavior. But it wasn't very clear exactly what they meant by that. So that created, ground for kind of conspiracy theories of, oh, Facebook is censoring, or oh, this is just cancel culture, and we're being canceled, and so it's like, it would be helpful if people actually knew why Facebook does the things that it does, and the reasoning that it gives these days are very often not clear enough, and we don't really understand. And then again, when you extrapolate that to like multiple tech giants, right? And every tech giant has its own community standards, its own guidelines, and then it's really confusing. Like, something that would be considered hate speech on Facebook might not be considered hate speech on YouTube, but Twitter might not like it, and so it's kind of confusing for people. So I think, while I understand that it's difficult for them to try to avoid authoritarian laws in the countries that they operate, as long as they decide to continue operating there, like the easiest way would be to not operate there. But I think what's perhaps more important for Facebook, that is a lower hanging fruit that it could do, is just be more transparent about what it does.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. That's really insightful. Next, I want to ask Yin this question. This happened recently, and just wanted to ask this question so much. Facebook has rejected to disclose any information about communication and posts of Myanmar military and police in relation to Rohingya genocide as requested by the Gambia. As the company has been criticized for failing to cooperate to bring perpetrator to justice, how do you think this can be a lesson learned for other countries about the decision of Facebook on this matter?
Yeah, a bit difficult question, but I would see that case in two folds. Firstly, like the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to privacy has stated, every interference of the right to privacy should take careful and critical assessment of its necessity, legitimacy, and proportionality. Therefore, as a user and also a human rights defender, for me, it is good that Facebook doesn't easily release its user, draft and publish, in a private communication to a party, regardless of being, defendant or complainant of the ICJ at first. At least, we can see there we have sort of the right to privacy on Facebook. Since the right to privacy is interlinked to the right to freedom of expression, that rejection by Facebook on the request of Gambia at the first stage might be a positive situation for its users around the world. I think if the national law does not prohibit the disclosing the user private electronic communications, the decision of Facebook might be different. But I will be extremely worried about my right to privacy in that case. But in the second fold of my view, the already, public post and stated of the military officers and military affiliated accounts and pages should be released at the expense of our right to know and the victims' justice. On this matter, we have, our organization has long pointed out that Facebook that cannot, rush deletions of military accounts and pages from their platform might constitute the deletion of the evidence, actually. Since the UN, independent investigation mechanism has recently announced that Facebook handed over some evidence to them recently, it will not be a bit fair, to say the company failed, totally to cooperate for justice. But it is really important that we need to see whether Facebook has provided enough evidence, in order to further build the legal proceedings in both ICC and also ICJ through the UN independent investigation mechanisms. That my opinion on that case. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is really interesting. The next question is about probably one of the most controversial Facebook policy. And here we are talking about the real name policy here. And I would like to ask Mathieu on this, since Cambodia is where this policy has posed a great risk on digital security on government critics. So how does the real name policy of Facebook have effect on digital security of government critics in Cambodia? And what do you think can be a recommendation for Facebook on that?
Yes, so indeed, it's a controversial policy in a country like Cambodia, where someone taking his right to free expression can lead himself or herself to imprisonment. The real identity policy becomes something that can create some harm. We have seen entirely peaceful and legitimate expression online go prosecuted on spurious, bogus criminal charges. And we have an increasing number of online social media users that are being persecuted and sent to prison for their peaceful expression on the platform. So while in some countries, balancing the pros and cons of anonymity on a social media platform versus trying to push for a real identity is different. I think it's important for social media platform to be able to be more aware of the local context, and then in each local context identify whether a real identity policy can create more harm than good. And so again, applying the good old do no harm policy would probably have the real identity policy in a place like Cambodia suspended, at least that there's not this insistence to provide one's real identity and at the expense of risking arrest, persecution, and jail time. Similarly, for example, another not as much a policy as something that social media platforms, including Facebook, have been quite insistent on is this two-step authentication through mobile phone numbers. Again, I can see that in a market like North America, it has a lot of positives. But in areas where mobile operators can be co-opted or are accomplices to people who seek to repress and suppress critics, this can become dangerous. As we've seen in Cambodia, a number of social media accounts have been hacked using the phone number as recovery mechanism, and that the code was intercepted, and activists and critics lose their accounts or are secretly spied upon for weeks, if not months. So I think that each policy have pluses and minuses, but there definitely needs to be more attention put on the local context to see in each country whether the policies can lead to more harm than good.
Thank you so much, Mathieu. Last round before we go to the Q&A, I have only one question here, and in which speaker can take turn to answer. As we know that it's really challenging to rely on the national government in the region on human rights protection. Given that big tech is so powerful like this and its impact on human rights, do you think that it is necessary for the regional stakeholders like ASEAN or Asia to act? What can be the recommendation for them in order to hold big tech accountable? What do you think that is the necessary mechanism that is missing? Probably Liza would like to go first.
Okay, Play. I'm not really sure if regional mechanisms like ICHR and the ASEAN can do something to regulate social media platforms, etc., because they operate in countries. And then, but what I do know is that these regional mechanisms can actually start looking at digital rights issues. Because so much is happening in the region, there are declarations coming out in the region. Maybe these mechanisms, the ICHR or the ASEAN, can start looking into that and promote people's rights in all spheres, including the digital sphere. Definitely, we have to make the platforms accountable because they're just so powerful, even bigger than nations. And I agree that one of it's difficult actually to do that, but I think Kirsten already mentioned the issue of transparency. They should be transparent in what they do when the process. It has to be clear how they deal with complaints, etc. So that's one. And again, as I mentioned, although this may be difficult, I hope they will abide by. There are international rules, standards on human rights. Hopefully, they will abide by all this. There is the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, and I know that Facebook, for instance, and Google are members of, for instance, of the Global Network Initiative. They're supposed to be for freedom of expression. Then they should know what to do.
Kirsten, please.
Yeah, I think Lisa is right. Like there are existing international standards and international regulations and laws that cover, freedom of expression and hate speech, for instance. There's international precedents as to what's considered hate speech and things like that tech companies could use to perhaps standardize their community guidelines a bit more, so it's more easy for lay people to understand. So it's not like they have to reinvent the wheel. There's already things out there that they could use as guidelines, and similar for regional bodies like AICHA or ASEAN. There's already international laws and regulations and principles that they could refer to when they are interacting with these tech companies. I'm not hugely optimistic about ASEAN or AICHA because they are still, the way they function still makes them very much within the power of the governments in the region. And if we already can't work with those governments, then it's very hard to work with ASEAN and AICHA when the reps are basically these governments. But definitely there needs to be recognition that digital rights form part of the human rights discussion, that it's not just about technology and business and innovation, that there are actually serious concerns that affect human rights in like the region, good for reputation, but we always leave out the human rights angle. And I think that needs to be emphasized a bit more throughout the region, that this is as much an issue that needs to be discussed and needs to be assessed when we roll out anything new as, the business angle, the profit angle.
Thank you, Kirsten. Yin, you have any opinion on this?
Yeah. Hi. And the recommendation issue, the recommendation parts. Like Liza said, we have this ASEAN and AICHA. They have also ASEAN declarations and, the charter, etc. So they should know what they should do. So, from my point of view, I would not recommend or advocate that ASEAN or AICHA either, both of them to add something for our rights, digital rights, for 3 reasons. The first reason is because I'm not convinced that the non-interference policy or, their constant value of the government of ASEAN is successful so far in protecting our, non-derogatory rights, let alone our humans, the freedom of expression or information rights on the digital platform. And the second reason is because that both ASEAN and AICHA are not independent court. Though, in the ASEAN Declaration, the Article 23 of the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration already repeat the Article 19 of the UDHR. But our civil and political rights, the 2 rights that we are discussing right now, the freedom of expression and right to information, are reality, violated by those tech giants. And the lack of that, judicial mechanism in ASEAN regional system cannot hold the tech companies accountability. But, even if there is a regional court at ASEAN level, I would be really worried about the independence and integrity of the judges from some ASEAN countries, including my country, Myanmar. And another reason is that, every international regional human rights mechanism has to rely on domestic law, in protecting individuals' human rights. This is why I will relentlessly advocate the Myanmar government to reform the domestic legal framework to fully protect the right to freedom of expression and information, so that it can protect its people, right from the tech, giants like this, to some extent. Also, I would like to recommend to Facebook to improve their community standards in line with the international human rights law, not just only, words, but also implementation. In regards to the other question, like, what kind of, necessary mechanism is missing? I think in that case, social media council or the self-regulatory body is necessary, like many people have already mentioned that. So though there are some challenges might come in, applying or social and cultural norms of each country in the later, I believe it is far better than our government regulation and company regulator council, for example, Facebook oversight body.
Okay, we have to wrap up. Mathieu, your turn.
I mean, I will maybe just take 1 second, I think, for calling for ASEAN and AICHR to regulate. I think one has to be very careful what one wishes for. I think I do not think that ASEAN as a regional body have a track record that would fill us with confidence when it comes to safeguarding the basic freedoms of expression, access to information, or in the real world. I don't know why they would do a better job online. So I would just keep it at that. I think it probably would be better among civil society groups to maybe strengthen a regional voice to create some form of civil society-led pressure for big tech to reform, but I would not pin our hopes on ASEAN on this one.
Okay, thank you so much, Mathieu. We have, well, it's now 1 here in Bangkok. Next we go to Q&A. The Secretariat has already provided you with instruction of what to do if you have questions. So if you have questions or comments, please use the function raise a hand, and in which you get to speak. But I have seen some questions line up already. So I will pick the questions for the panelists to answer. Let me see. It's from Chanprasert. To a country where Facebook has a policy office, how's Facebook relationship like with civil society actor, particularly with human rights defender? How do you think this engagement can be improved? I think this one can be answered by Kirsten.
Yeah, so there's a large Facebook office in Singapore. There are occasional meetings with civil society. So for example, in the run-up to POFMA, I understand there was, interaction between Facebook and civil society actors, but I feel like it tends to not be that robust, and I think it could be much better. Like Facebook could do with a better and deeper understanding of things of civil society experiences and why activists are particularly worried about certain things that might not be immediately apparent to other people in the country. And it does feel like a tech giant company like Facebook probably interfaces more with the government than with civil society, because just all the between business and regulation and all sorts of different sorts of consultations and engagements, it seems like there's a lot more focus on talking to establishment than civil society, and I feel like that should change. There's a lot of local context that you would never ever get from talking to government, that you would get from talking to civil society, and this isn't just Singapore, right? This applies to all countries, that there are things that activists can tell you about what they experience that the government would never tell you, or probably never admit to anyway, even if you ask them about it. So I think, yeah, there should be more transparency about, what it is that they are trying to understand, or, and I know that some of these meetings that they have with government are classified, but if there could be a little bit of more information exchange about, what it is that they are hearing or what it is that they are concerned about, to give civil society some sort of frame of reference as well, that would be really useful.
Thank you, Kirsten. I see that Gaia has her hands up, so we'll give her time to ask question to the panelists. Gaia.
Thank you, Floy, and thank you. This has been a really interesting session. But I kind of wanted to maybe change the way we're looking at Facebook, and it relates a little bit to what Yin mentioned. Now, in many instances, the way we talked about Facebook is as if, and it's true, is about the volume of content they have to regulate that being too difficult for Facebook, or this complexity of national law, whether to follow or not. But there's a whole other side to Facebook that sometimes is missed, which is willful complicity. In the case of India, for instance, we clearly could, the Wall Street Journal revelations showed how officials within Facebook purposefully decided to not take action against hate speech because it would impact their business prospects. At least in the case of Myanmar, they were able to say that they missed it, or they didn't have the right understanding. But in the case of India, they knew what was happening and they decided to allow that kind of hate speech to stay on. So I think, and the reason they do that is because it is monetarily, politically advantageous for Facebook to monetize hate, to allow political expression that is hate speech to stay on, to curry political favors. So, given that many legal experts in India think that this is actually criminal negligence, so given that Facebook also has that side to them where they, like any other business, they commit these crimes. So then, should the discussion now change to a much more serious, much more hard position that civil society should be taking? Because a lot of groups are talking about consumer protection laws now applying to Facebook, right? If I bought a product and it harms me, then I have some sort of, some legal remedy to that. Should civil society now be thinking about a harder position than against platforms?
Thank you, Gaia. Thank you for your comment. We have this question from Hanung. In the event of ASEAN and Asia as an institution, might not be provided bigger magnitude to address digital rights issue in the region. Are there any alternative platform that we can utilize to introduce, for example, regional guideline on digital right or business conduct for tech company, and to some extent, both ASEAN and Asia to move towards the direction that we want? What the panelists think on this? No one?
If I may, I will answer that. In my opinion, personal opinion, and as a human rights defender in Myanmar, I will not duplicate ASEAN guidelines or something like that, because they already have the UN level international business guidelines. We need to, or the tech company, not only Facebook, but also other tech companies should also, abide by the guidelines. So, it's going to be we don't need to duplicate, or we don't need to interpret the, technical or the, international, terms and international law terms and international, human rights norm already exists in those kind of guidelines and principles. That's my personal point of view.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Yin. Anyone else?
Not on that question, but on Gaia's intervention. Actually, I agree with Gaia that in some countries there's actually complicity of Facebook with government, so they work together, and it's at the at the expense of people, of their rights, and it's because they're working on a business model. After all, these big tech platforms, they're businesses, and it's profit first before the people, before public interests. And yeah, definitely. And I think some groups have already, some civil society organizations have already started taking positions on some of these platforms. I've heard some people actually wanting to sue platforms like Facebook. In the Philippines, for instance, you had during the Cambridge Analytica scandal, more than 1.7 million Filipinos, I think, were reach them and say that these are the things that we want. What are you going to do with this? How can you help us? how can you be a true, true to what you say that you want, that you want to freedom of expression for all.
Yeah, I think taking both the questions together, like, it's something that I also get stuck at, because it seems like, so for example, if Facebook is found to be complicit or actually actively facilitating harm for business or political gain, then on what basis and what avenues are there for ordinary users to hold them to account? And it seems like it would be very unlikely that that would be possible in the country where they found to be doing it, because, particularly if we are concerned about things like the independence of investigations and judiciary and things like that, it might be difficult to, for example, try to sue them or file a police report against them in that country. And so it strikes me that perhaps, is there a way for more international solidarity to happen, and in a way that is beyond just like signing statements together, right? Because I don't think Facebook really cares about statements unless they become really huge PR scandals for them. So like, is there a way that there can be more organizing to, if we have like some sort of, if we sue Facebook, if it wasn't just Filipinos suing Facebook, but also Filipinos plus Singaporeans plus Americans plus people in Myanmar and people in Cambodia, would that create a bigger kind of way to basically hit the bottom line that makes them listen? But I don't really know how that would happen.
I think it's all good ideas. I think I think many of us have seen Facebook trying to approach us and enter in dialogues. I think we have to maintain the dialogue with them, but as well as keeping up the pressure so that their opening up the moment it does not merely amount to like a PR stunt. I think there is an opportunity for them to be better. There is an opportunity for them to be better by enhancing their relationship with civil society. But that will not happen if they're not pressured to do so. So yes, I think collective, regional and international action to keep them accountable is important. In a small country like Cambodia, I think that we are in a way privileged because there is no big financial bottom line when it comes to a small country like Cambodia. So I think it's easier to get them to behave principally. It must be a lot more difficult for countries like the Philippines. But I would say if we both continue to engage while at the same time creating some form of accountability pressure, hopefully that can lead us to a better place.
Is there any comment? One last comment, because we are about to reach time. If not, I would end with the closing remark. Okay, so I will have to say that we have a really rich discussion here and great Q&A as well. And I would like to thank all the 4 panelists so much for their time and energy here throughout this 1 hour. We got done during this time of the pandemic, so have a great day. Bye.
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 Bye.